From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
We're talking about the relationship, just as with the military-industrial complex. It is the military as, one large thing, and all the branches of that military working together with the industries that create the things that are necessary for that military to function, right?
Exactly.
This is the military, again, as a thing with the branches, but working with the entertainment industry in some way.
Yes, in multiple ways. We're talking feature films, we're talking VR and AR, virtual and augmented reality, we're talking multimedia video games, music videos, we're talking television. Here in the US, for a long time, it's been common for the armed forces to work directly with production companies in all areas of the media to supply things like troops, gear, equipment, logistics, even some modeling, for instance, in the case of video games. This is a symbiosis of a sort, which would be common to everybody from your high school biology. There are 5 types of symbiotic relationships, right? We all remember them: mutualism, commensalism, predation, parasitism, and competition. This would be when it works for everyone involved. This is mutualism. The production company saves a lot on budget, and the military gets a lot of goodwill. So, of course, it makes sense. And this is not a huge secret. A lot of people don't know about it, but it's not a huge secret. What do I mean when I say that? The Department of Defense has a statement about it on its website. They're excited. They think this is a great idea.
Yeah, that's right. Their official position on this is that they've been working for nearly a century to, quote, accurately depict military stories and make sure sensitive information isn't disclosed. So it's kind of a quid pro quo situation. Like, let's say a big production needs, some kind of military, set piece. That stuff's very expensive and also would probably require some sign off from the military in general. So this is sort of like we'll help you out, you help us out. We kind of help guide the way you depict our brand, because let's be honest, the military is a brand, especially in this context, and you get free tanks or whatever for your tentpole movie.
Yeah, so there. Let's take an example from LA. So this happens a lot in Hollywood. There's an Army Lieutenant Colonel who is the director of the LA Office of the Chief of Public Affairs. His name is Tim Hyde. And Hyde says, we take both of these roles very seriously, meaning accurate depictions and keeping the secret stuff secret. His office isn't in charge of the entire armed forces in Hollywood. His office just focuses on the stuff for the Army. And every other branch of the armed services, including the Coast Guard, has its own office in Hollywood just for this stuff. I mean, we can talk. I think we all were kind of thinking about this as we're gearing up for this episode, but we can talk pretty easily about feature films and fiction that we've seen here. Because I think feature films are probably the stuff that people most easily recognize this complex from.
Oh, sure. I mean, one of the first things I think about is just how cool big action movies are when some tanks show up, like some actual tanks. And you're looking at the screen, you could tell it's an actual tank, especially movies from my childhood where computer graphics weren't as sophisticated, where oh, that's an actual Huey helicopter. That's an actual, if you're thinking about Top Gun, that's an actual, I think it was an F-18. Oh, maybe it was a Tomcat. I don't know, but I don't remember at least. But yeah, when you know that it's a real thing, it just makes it that much cooler. And what I end up remembering are the times when the military in some form or fashion comes in and saves the day, such as in Jurassic Park 3. Do you guys remember that movie at all?
Nope.
Yes.
Was that the one with the pterodactyls?
Yes, all the pterodactyls are in Jurassic Park 3.
In the aviary, and they like walk like weirdly, like they're on crutches or something. I remember that part, and it looked really awkward.
Yes, but I have a very vivid memory of the end of that movie when they're on. I want to say they like come back to a beach area where they're just trying to get the heck off the island. They're hoping they're going to be saved, and then there's just some dude standing there on the island in a suit. I think maybe I'm wrong. I think that's what happens, and then all of a sudden the military shows up. I'm assuming the Navy in these they look like APCs, but they function in water as well, and they just roll up with a bunch of military personnel and save the day and get everybody off the island.
And that's a common trope. I remember watching Independence Day, the original Independence Day. Saw it in the theaters. Thought it was kick ass. And it's one of those things where we don't worry too much about the plot holes. Like, how did that guy from Jurassic Park also end up in Independence Day? You know what I mean?
It's a shared
Like,
universe.
Why is everybody in those films acting except for Jeff Goldblum? And what an interesting life he leads. Aliens and dinosaurs. But the military plays a huge role in Independence Day. And just like your point, Matt, there are at-length depictions of actual military craft. We see the jets, just like in Top Gun. We see uniformed individuals carrying out their duties and operations. And you can still see, of course, you can see this in blockbuster action films. It's amazing, and it's so expensive. Like, if you look at, okay, you can think of those obvious examples. Top Gun is probably one of the most famous examples, but there are a ton of the movies in the 80s, 90s, and the modern day that do this. Apollo 13, Red Dawn, Black Hawk Down, of course, but then there's other stuff you might not have thought of, like the Transformers franchise. All of the films in the Transformers franchise benefited from the military entertainment complex.
Yeah, a great place to see it is the types of disaster movies like Towering Inferno or whatever that
What
have
was
been around
that?
since
A
the
San
70s.
Andreas or something like that? Something like that. It was about the fault.
It's about the fault. I don't remember. There's so many, and it's such a well-worn trope. It's been around forever, but there's always an opportunity for folks to get rescued from a burning building by military personnel, and you're right. They always look like the heroes. I got to ask you before we get into it, do you think movies like Apocalypse Now had military cosign, where it kind of makes the military look bad and sort of shows the flaws that can arise from leadership and people that go power mad? I would think maybe not.
Excellent question. So there are, of course, we have to ask about the opposite of this practice. So there are, of course, many films, many also in the United States, that put the military in less than a positive light. To Apocalypse Now, I was thinking of that one because I'm such a huge fan of that story, but I was also thinking of Full Metal Jacket, which itself is a somewhat damning condemnation of the effects that war can have on people. Those films were still made, obviously, to great acclaim, but did they have that same level of help? As we're going to see, not exactly, because this practice is cyclical. Funding for U.S. productions of this sort actually went down in the 70s because U.S. audiences were so very fatigued about the ongoing conflicts in Vietnam. And of course, the fact that the war in Vietnam was one of the first times the American public saw uncensored footage of what happens on the ground during a hot conflict. So yes, there are caveats, and they're really what today's episode hinges on: the implications of those caveats and the employment of those. Some version of this practice, how it's so old. Some version of it dates all the way back to 1927. A little bit of lore for the movie buffs in the crowd. The first year of the Academy Awards, 1927, the Army helped with the production of a silent film you may have never heard of. It was called Wings. It has nothing to do with the sitcom. It was about World War I fighter pilots. This film went on to win the very first Oscar for Best Picture. So this is like a known thing. And there's a guy named Tom Secker from an outfit called Spy Culture, which does great work. He was able to compile a list. He set out to say, let me make the most comprehensive possible list of just feature films that have benefited from this relationship. As of his list, which was current as of 2016, contains more than 400 different films that were made with
Yeah.
some form of cooperation or collusion with the Department of Defense.
Wow. 400 films. Now, I want to add in one extra little piece here, just that I found, Ben, and just want to talk with you guys about it. To my understanding, there was very much a position of the various militaries, especially the Army, where they didn't want to fund or work with films where the bad guy wasn't extraterrestrial or a monster or some big bad thing for quite a long time. It was They were generally looking at pieces that would highlight the actual military operations, or possible military operations. And then when the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and then a little bit before that, became so popular, they were just noticing that, well, it doesn't matter what the opposing force is, as long as the military itself and the operations look legitimate and correct, and the military is placed in a good light.
Yeah, they're the protagonists or aiding the protagonists in some way, shape, or form.
Right. They're the cavalry coming. You know what I mean? And those are militaristic tones or intentions that we see in things that might not ostensibly be war stories, even, or military stories, just stories that involve a conflict where you need the best of the best to intervene. And who is that in the third act? Well, if you play your cards right, it's the U.S. military, and it saves you a shit ton of money on production. But as it saves you money as someone making the film.
Yeah.
If you live in the U.S., it very much does not save you money. Spoiler alert. But this happens in other things that I think a lot of people don't think about. So it happens in television, it happens in talk and even game shows. Like, there are so many unscripted documentaries, right? Because those are very inexpensive to make. You'll see them on History Channel, Discovery Channel, or when history is going through its annual Hitler phase. There's so many documentaries about this. Of course, the DoD keeps an eye on some of those documentaries, especially if they're about something more recent, like Desert Storm. And they have to, because they have to make sure that nothing is being divulged. And I would argue that is completely above board, and that needs to happen, because a lot of the people speaking in those things have signed legal agreements that constrain what they can say. So, of course, they should have final right of refusal there.
Well, and let's not forget too, I mean, we've all been involved in podcast projects where we had to license audio, of like archival footage. And oftentimes various networks have very specific criteria for how and when they will allow their footage to be used. I can't imagine the military is any different, and they obviously have a lot of archival stuff as well. So I wonder if possibly, if your documentary is portraying the military in the right light, you could save a whole lot of money on licensing costs by getting that stuff gratis from the U.S. military.
Yeah, quite possibly.
Or just go to FedFlix on archive.org and use the public domain stuff that was created with our tax dollars. Actually, it's our parents' and grandparents' tax dollars.
Well, yeah, you still have server costs. So we've got what corporate America calls buy-in. Another thing that happens would be, astute listeners, you just heard us say game shows. Yeah, it's true. I'm sorry if you are very anti-military for some reason and you very much love Jeopardy. Well, Jeopardy is also in this big, big bed with Uncle Sam. Price is Right is there. Talk shows like Ellen, if anybody still likes or listens to Ellen, or Steve Harvey, those also, all of those have military-themed episodes. Surprisingly, one thing here that could be an episode all its own, we could spend a whole hour on this, military financed and produced music videos. Music videos, they come out, like there's a bevy of them that comes out every day, especially on YouTube. And there's a great piece by a Vice journalist named Matthew Galt, who says the following: from China to Russia to Iraq to the good old US of A, militaries love spending money to produce lavishly surreal music videos. I'm going to tell you something. There are some hardworking folks on production and on camera, on mic, in these videos on the US side. But for my money, if you want to watch the really, really elaborate, weird ones, check out the ones from other countries. Azerbaijan, for some reason, China, Russia, they all got really into hip hop too. I'm not going to say it's all good. Maybe some is lost in translation, but they're not pinching pennies on it. These are
Well,
big
certainly
productions.
certainly a good way to reach a different audience, that might have a tempered view of the military. And it's essential. I mean, I wouldn't go so far as maybe to call it propaganda, but it's approaching that, or it can approach that, right?
For sure. I mean, Katy Perry joins the Marines in one particular music video. The Air Force, and I did not know this, has a punk cover of its official theme song. The Air Force also has an official band. I think their name is like Maximum Impact or something like that.
Oh, that's so metal.
And of course, this is something I imagine the four of us are going to be returning back to later in the show. But of course, video games, that should be a less surprising outlet. I mean, it is very difficult to look at some of the world's most famous video games and not imagine the military taking interest here. Although I will say one note: this was an aspect of media where the military really struggled at first.
Yeah, but the military has been interested in simulating anything that they could consider like a war game, or training, or for pilots to fly an aircraft, to tank operators, to all this stuff. They've been interested in making a simulation version for a long time of their operations. And, it should be no surprise that they wanted to get in the game as soon as they possibly could. And we just made a quick note here. You may have heard of it before. We've mentioned it before on this show, but a little video game called America's Army that made its first version debut, I think, in 2002. And then there were several versions. The latest one I'm aware of is called America's Army Proving Ground, and it went into beta in 2013, came out and officially released in 2015. But it's an actual game created, developed, and published by the U.S. Army.
And this is completely legal.
Mm-hmm.
This is above board. There's nothing wrong with this. And this is just one example of other things. But what I like about this example, Matt, is it's more overt and it's more apparent, because we get into the sticky stuff when we leave the realm of transparency. And that's where we get to what in my mind is the bloody multi-billion-dollar question here. What exactly is Uncle Sam and other global versions of Uncle Sam getting in return for this? Are they really investing billions and billions of dollars worth of labor and manpower and equipment just to make sure stories are accurate and to keep an eye out for leaked information? The answer is absolutely not. They get much, much, much more than that.